Jim Carlson is also here, and I call him Jim when we're doing work things, but he's also my dad. So that is a little bit of an explanation for how I ended up with proximity and access to work in prisons. And so I'll tell you a little bit about arts and corrections. And so whenever I say Jim, I really mean dad, but that feels, I can't ever figure out how to do that. So that's Jim Carlson today, and he's here with us. So thank you for coming. And Barbara Carlson, I see her arm. That's my mom's arm is also here. Okay, very good. We're glad that you guys could make it. So also this is really fun. I'm looking around, and I don't think I've seen everybody, but I see a lot of familiar faces, and just hello, it's fun to see you guys. So thanks for coming. As a few just quick, I guess, framing comments, I think always when we're talking about things like prison, that can be a really sensitive topic, and folks have different kinds of experiences with that institution. And so I think it's important just to say that, to acknowledge that I personally have never been a victim of violent crime. And so when I'm talking about these things, sometimes I think I talk about them in a way that really reflects an experience that wouldn't be true of everyone. And so I really want to be sensitive to that in our conversation today. I also want to note at the outset that my experiences teaching in the prison have been overwhelmingly positive, and in part because, I mean, it's a really cool program, and we'll tell you about it, but also anyone who comes to this program is coming voluntarily, right? So the only incarcerated people that I'm meeting are folks that are choosing to make moves that are kind of bringing them back into restoration with themselves, or back into restoration as much as it is possible with the communities that are important to them. And so when I talk about having a really positive experience, I think it's just important to note that it's probably not a fair slice of prison life in the US in general. And so I think to try to understand how it is that the two of us ended up here today talking with you, I think when we think about the intersections of justice and mercy and education, there's a place for the story of arts and corrections, and that's kind of a little bit of the story we want to tell you today, to fit in, because it really sits at that intersection of like, okay, well, justice, but also mercy, but also education, and what does prison say about us as a society, right? Like, what relationship does any person in this society what's their relationship with prison and with these issues? And then also, so I think the large question for me that I want us to think about today is this issue of access, right? When we think about the work of Bryan Stevenson, or in this case, arts and corrections, and think about what kinds of access do we want to know about, advocate for. And I really think that we probably as a group would land in different spaces in that, but that's, I think, a key word for me is always access. Like, what is it that we really want when we think about justice and education and mercy? So with that said, this is the 32nd version of the history of arts and corrections. So arts and corrections is a program that ran in the state of California in the prison system. It kind of slow started in the late 70s, became official 1980. And the thing that was cool about it is it was actually part of the Department of Corrections. And so you had artists who were at each prison who were funded by the state to be in that space and provide art programming, and then hire contract artists from the community. So you had community artists that were coming in and teaching classes. None of these courses are credit bearing, so they're voluntary, and they're not courses that you're going to get college credit for. And arts and corrections grew, and at one point it was at every prison in the state of California there was some kind of arts program going on, and it would kind of, each institution, it would take on the local flavor of kind of whatever was possible there. And so I know at New Folsom, where so Jim, who's here with us, taught at was hired to be the administrator at San Quentin, went to run the program for the whole state, and then went back to New Folsom to run the program there. And so I know at New Folsom, that's the program I'm most familiar with, because that's where I had the privilege of teaching. There was visual arts, creative writing classes, poetry classes, but really that institution ended up with a lot of music programs, a lot of really important music programs. And that's just kind of the confluence of the artists that were interested in coming in and what was available and what could be done. So that's a very short version of the history of arts and corrections. And, but I wanted to tell it quickly. We'll have plenty of time to discuss, but I wanted to get through that because I really wanted to give Carol a chance to tell her story, which I think is probably what I think is most interesting, or the perspective that I think could be most useful to us today. So Carol, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I think what I'm going to do at this point is share my screen because I have a I have PowerPoint that I want to share. So I'm going to do this. I hope I'm remembering it correctly on our tutorial the other night. There we go. All right. So for the most part, everything is showing here. Um, Hang on. And can everybody hear me? Shake your heads. Yes. Yes. Okay. Um, So my name is Carol, and I wanted to share my story with all of you. And I think it's important that we have faces with the names so that you understand who I'm talking about. And also, as I go through it, you're going to see a lot of changes with haircuts and beards, and a lot of these guys that are growing up. But more importantly, besides the faces, there will be some confidence and self-esteem that they're going to be wearing. And I just want you to be aware of that as you watch. Um, Also, at the very end, I have a very short audio clip that I'd like to uh, show you. And I know Zoom's going to be a little difficult. The sound is not really great, so I won't give you a whole lot of it, but it will be at the very end for you to enjoy. So I am the parent of an inmate, and my son's name is Adam, and he's currently incarcerated in the state of California. Um, and it happened at the beginning of his senior year in high school. He was 18 years old, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life. Um, After he arrived in prison is when I joined what's called the Inmate Family Council, which is a group that meets with the warden at the prison, and we discuss issues that relate to the families. We become the voice of the families. It's also a chance for me to learn how the prison works and who's who. That's when I got introduced to arts and corrections. I got introduced to Jim, and the rest is my beautiful history. I'm just so grateful for the opportunity that has come my way to be able to advocate for this program. So as we start here, there are three things that are lost with incarceration besides freedom. And those three things are self-esteem, dignity, and identity. And when an inmate enters prison, he or she is on an emotional low. Their privacy is gone, and their freedom to decide for anything for themselves is gone. They can't choose when they want to go eat. They don't know, they can't choose what they're going to eat. They can't decide when they're going to call home. It's gone. The other thing that's missing is their identification. The name that their parents so carefully chose when they were born is gone. They get an ID number. And then some of their friends inside decide to give them a nickname, and this sticks. So Adam was 19 when he finally arrived, and he referred to himself as an emotional cripple. He was impressionable, he was vulnerable, and had no idea what prison was about. He had never been in trouble, and here he was entering a level 4 maximum security prison, and he was greeted by gangs who, of course, told him that he needed them for protection. So he made the second worst decision of his life, and he joined. So for the next 3 years, he was tangled up in prison politics, prison violence, and to the point where it finally got the best of him and he couldn't do it anymore. So he walked away from it, but it required protective custody. When he entered protective custody, it wasn't gangs that greeted him. It was Jim Carlson and Arts and Corrections. So his journey in Arts and Corrections began first by simply playing electric guitar with his buddy Drifter. And eventually he was invited to study classical guitar with an amazing person by the name of Gabe Becker, the guitar teacher. And Adam found a talent that he didn't know he had, and he started to change. And Gabe enforced a work ethic that required 100% effort every day. And this was a good fit for Adam. It came just at the right time. The end result, Adam says that he now carries Gabe in his head every single day. Gabe's influence is in every homework assignment, every work order that shows up on Adam's desk, and every self-help group that he attends. Adam's mantra is, Gabe is watching. I will not compromise, and I will no longer give up. So it didn't stop with music. Adam joined Adam joined Anna's creative writing class, and writing became his passion and his solace. And it was another skill that he had just not explored. So the writing skills he learned were one thing, but the desire to learn and to eventually teach and to grow all became something built into the new Adam. And because of Anna's influence, and his world had changed forever. His self-esteem was reimagined and allowed him to begin to believe in himself, conquer his fears of his emotions, which he actually realized were no longer his weakness, but his strength. His dignity to hold his head high and trust that he is worthy of new responsibilities soared. At the prison that he's currently at, he first worked as a gold coat. And the Gold Coat program is something that pairs inmates with those who are in the mental health program and require a constant one-on-one attention. And these are guys that without this pairing could not manage any of their activities of daily living and would fall victim to the negativity on a prison yard. So as a Gold Coat, Adam had a chance to bring dignity to these men and give them a better day every day. And his identity is back. He is currently the head machinist in factory maintenance and repair for the prison. The challenges and responsibilities of this job are something that he never dreamed of when he entered prison 20 years ago. He wasn't even afforded and trusted with a regular toothbrush when he entered prison. And now he's working with sheet metal doing fabrication. So this means so much to him. Being selected for this has given him back his identity that he appreciates every day. And he knows that it's his name on the job and his reputation on the work order. And that's what means so much to him. He, as I mentioned, came into prison at the beginning of his senior year in high school. So he has now graduated and is currently in college classes. And at the end of this current semester, he'll have 2 AA degrees and is going to shoot for a 4-year degree in engineering. It's not going to be an easy task in prison with that kind of a major, but I don't, at this point, put anything past him. He has found grace and humility and an enormous ability to forgive. After several years of conflict, he has reunited with his father. And I will say it is the most beautiful love affair between a father and a son that anyone could imagine. He has an open mind, an altruistic approach. He has embraced every culture, every race, every religious belief, and every personality, good or bad, inside prison. And in June of 2022, he is going to have his first opportunity for a parole board hearing. And it is with fingers crossed and every ounce of hope that he will be able to join us in the free world someday as a son, a husband, a father, and a co-worker that anyone would hope to have. Adam is now 38 years old, and I have my Adam back. I don't have him back at the dinner table or for holidays or birthdays, but I have the fine human being back that I know I raised. He has become my personal example of strength and courage. And I know my role will always be as parent, but Adam and I enjoy a very unique adult relationship. And we talk about this all the time. And I've always said that if Adam were not my son, I would want him as my very best friend. There's one other story that I really want to share with you about one of the men that I've had the privilege to get to know because of Arts and Corrections and because of Adam. And his name is Drifter. And I first learned about Drifter through Adam and the music and writing program. And we corresponded at first, and then later I got approved to visit him. Our first visit was also because of the Christmas recital in the visiting room that the first year guitar class was going to be giving. And so Drifter and I greeted one another for the first time in person, and he was very nervous and he lacked a lot of confidence. And he was looking around the visiting room and he was seeing people, families sitting there with their children and having a meal and conversation. And suddenly this look came over his face and he said, I don't think I can do this. And I thought he was nervous about his performance. What I learned was he was seeing the inside of that visiting room for the first time in 17 years of incarceration. Nobody had visited him, and it was overwhelming for him. So he gathered himself together. They went out and did their performance. And when he was through, he came back up to me with tears streaming down his face. And he said to me, that was the most meaningful thing I have ever done with people I care about and I know who care about me. And what this showed me was, first of all, he had the strength and the courage to show his tears, because that's not done in prison. More importantly, to feel them. And this, I was recognizing, was the beginning of Drifter's personal changes and positive growth because of his music. And I had the privilege to be part of it. Here we are 3 years later, and he is actually giving a solo performance before the visitors in the visiting room at Christmas, and ultimately did a solo performance before the warden and the warden's staff. His confidence grew and helped him reconnect with his family. This man had not talked to his mother in 25 years. She actually thought he was dead. He desperately wanted to reconnect with her, so he utilized the help of the Salvation Army, and they located his mother, and she actually opened her arms and her heart and said, yes, I want to know my son. And they have enjoyed a lovely reconnection because of it. He is confident, emotionally strong, and has done the personal work that you and I can't even imagine, and has become the brother, the son, the co-worker, and the neighbor that we would all hope to have. He's learned to advocate for himself, and he truly is a different person. His statement about learning classical guitar is the following: this opportunity changed my life. It inspired me, and it challenged me like no other thing I have ever known. Classical guitar gives me a sense of fulfillment that can only come from the diligence and hard work that I have embraced. My hands are now the life of me. The education in music, writing, and visual arts have been life-changing for my Adam, for Drifter, and for so many others behind bars. And with the rebirth of self-esteem and dignity comes my favorite part, a new identity. Drifter decided that he no longer wished to be defined by his nickname he has lived with for the last 20 years. So he shed his prison moniker of Drifter and now proudly embraces his given name. He has been a great source of strength for me and offers the most beautiful friendship, which I cannot imagine living any of my part of my life without. So together with my Adam, he is brave, he is honest, and one of the most beautiful human beings I know. So hopefully, with the cooperation of Zoom, I introduce Mr. Jacob John Allen. And I am going to leave it with that. I don't know how the sound was, but we will leave it there.
Thank you, Carol.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm guessing some folks are kind of processing, but also this is your time and we have plenty of time. So of course, we got topics. We could talk all day, but I would love to hear from folks either by unmuting or if you want to use the chat. What do folks want to discuss, either about Carol's story or intersections with the book or things you're thinking about? Jenny says, thanks, Carol, for sharing your story.
Oh, I see it down here. Thank you.
which piece of the conversation, where should we go next?
I have a question, but I don't, oh, are you there? Okay.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Regarding these programs, and it looks like this one's in California, is this something that is offered to most of the prisons, or just, are they just kind of selected, or do you actually have to go and initiate it and say, I'd like to present this to prisoners, or how does that work?
Yeah, thanks, Maria.
Mhm.
That's a good question, right? So I think Arts and Corrections has kind of shape shifted over the years as it's attempted to sort of keep its funding or garner funding. And so the previous program model, at the height of the program in California, there was somebody at each prison who it was their job to then go find the artists and run programs. But let's see, I'm gonna make sure I get all the questions. To your point, it doesn't begin to serve enough people, right? I guess we can ask Jim, at the height of programming, AIC was probably incorporating what percentage of the prison population in California?
We'd like to think we were touching 10%.
So
Okay.
10% is a lot more than zero, but it's not a lot, right? It's not, it doesn't feel like enough. It doesn't feel like, yeah. So that's how that worked then. Now the programs are much more, you have different entities that want to come in that bid for contracts. So that it lacks sort of some of the central organization that the previous model did. And so Maria, to your point now, it is very much more like, oh, I run a theater troupe. We think we could probably, retrofit this for prison. And so then folks are, different groups are applying for access through like a grant funding program.
Okay. It's nice to see that. It always seems to be like it's a downward spiral. It's just, they're already in prison. They already have that reputation, especially, like the minorities in those cases, they go out into the real world and then, they're judged immediately because of that. And they feel like they have nothing to fall back on, those skills and stuff. So it's nice to see this. And so it's good to hear that.
Yeah, I think it really plays into one of Stevenson's main theses, right? That like no person is really the sum of the worst decision they ever made. But I think really to acknowledge what you're talking about systemic issues. We know that policing doesn't happen evenly among communities. We know that opportunity isn't offered evenly among communities. And so, yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about folks who maybe haven't had a lot of, I've sat around a table inside teaching so many times and just thought, bad word I won't say right now, I wonder what would have happened if this person had trumpet lessons when they were a kid, right? Every time I'm I also have never been brave enough to ask because it feels kind of looky-loo-ish, but I would bet my left leg that at any table, if you're sitting around a table inside in a classroom, 70% of those folks have come out of either like the foster care, like straight through the system, Mother California. There's somebody wrote a book called Mother California, or school to prison pipeline, or now we say nexus, right? Like those things. When you start talking to folks inside, a lot of those pathways become pretty clear in hindsight to somebody like me who is new to learning about that, right?
Thank you.
Anna, there's a question here in the chat that's asking about if there's any opportunity for those in the prison community who have benefited by these programs to talk and interact with youth that are already in the juvenile justice program. Would that be something similar to the mentorship programs that these guys decide to form based on being in the writing class and putting together a good their ideas? Is that similar?
Yeah. So thanks, Jenny. That's that's an awesome question. And I think I'll kick that one to probably Jim, but I will say, and I know this is totally not answering your question, but it's a good chance. I realized as I was kind of working through the PhD program and reading and trying to kind of reconcile things I was learning in school with what I was seeing when I was teaching in the prison, because those things were happening at the same time, it became pretty obvious to me that a lot of, and not bagging on colleagues across the country, but a lot of prison education programs, arts education or credit bearing, is very much focused on that incarcerated person as an individual, like I'm going to help you become a better writer. We're doing these discrete things. And it occurred to me, oh my gosh, right? These people are people in relationships. They exist in communities. I can't see them, right? Like they all have the same clothes on and I don't know their families, but a lot of them have families. And so we ended up building a whole curriculum program that said, hey, here's the deal. You come to class and we're going to learn the thing we're going to learn anyway, but you take the curricular materials, and the expectation is that you then turn around and mentor the person of your choice. It doesn't matter to me who, but I know you got kids, grandkids, people on the outside who would love to hear you and love to see you in, like who see you as a resource and a value to that community. And wouldn't it be fun if we could support those kinds of things, right? And start thinking about not just things like recidivism, but thinking about things like intergenerational incarceration, right? If you have parents in prison, there's a pretty good chance that you would be headed that way. And man, like, could we move the needle on those kinds of things by thinking about what's possible in classrooms? And so we've been running that program for a while. There's like a 24-part writing curriculum where you come to class 24 times and you take the material and you send it out, and you teach somebody. And it's pretty cool. Like I thought people would work with their children, but actually a lot of people have worked with their grandchildren. And so I had sort of misunderstood intergenerational incarceration that way. So that's been interesting. Not at all your question. Juvie programs. Okay, one more before we turn it over to Jim. I also know, at this point, I know folks who are out, who are turning around and choosing work that puts them back in support of people. So I only know people who have come through Arts and Corrections, but there's one person I know right now who's trying to get a job. It's a paid position, but working with incarcerated people, mentoring them. And so it's pretty cool when you see people, who've been in prison for a long time. That's a big choice to turn around and walk back in that gate, right? Like that's a big ask. So Jim, what juvie programs, do you probably know more about that than I do?
I'm not really aware of any juvenile programs that are similar to Arts and Corrections. I think the one thing that might relate to the question is that a lot of institutions, inmates have proposed and are developing and implementing programs where they serve as mentors, through video or even probably Zoom now, since it's become so powerful. But even programs where they brought kids that were in the system into the institution to interact on a physical basis with the guys. Now, this is not very different from the Scared Straight of 2 decades ago that they brought kids in and just tried to scare them into, changing their way. This is more of a mentoring thing that's going on. So that's about all I can say to that. I don't know of any things that are actually in the juvenile system that are paralleling what we're doing in Arts and Corrections.
What about Mike's work?
Oh, I know that, Barb just reminded me, Michael Owens wrote his poetry book, and now he has done a study guide that they're going to try and target young people reading the poetry and then doing the study guide. So Michael's done a whole curriculum too that is
And who is Mike?
is being published. Michael is there it is.
Okay. Yeah. Now, sorry, Jenny, I guess I did forget. This was a point that I intended to make, so it's embarrassing that we forgot. Of course, Michael is doing this. So I'll put in the chat a link if you're interested. This is a book of poetry by Michael Owens. I'll put a link in so you can figure out how to get it. And that's the person we're talking about. He's an incarcerated artist and teacher. Well, I don't know. Did you want to keep going, Jim? He's currently still incarcerated, but doing a lot, very thoughtful, very intentional work, trying to figure out how to be an influence on the outside. He also did you could find him, he co-authored a peer-reviewed publication with one of his professors from his community college. So Mike's pretty amazing person. So I'll put that in the chat. Jim, did you have anything else to say about that?
No, I think that's a great example of it. The little bit that is happening. Definitely not enough.
Okay, so I know folks are kind of thinking, but where else do you want to take this conversation?
Are there any similar types of programs in the state of Washington?
Okay, so that is the right question for, and I always tell my students, don't look at my face because I'm laughing about things that aren't funny, and that is true every time I'm talking. But that's something that I should know a lot more about, and it's a little embarrassing that I am from the state of Washington and I don't know more. But I do know there are lots of great things happening in the state of Washington. I know a little bit more about credit bearing opportunities. Like there's programs at the prison where you can matriculate from prison to 4-year colleges on the west side. I know even our Tri-Cities, it's not well utilized, and so we haven't really like built it up. But there is an existing pathway for folks to come out of if they've worked on community college coursework and then matriculate even to our institution. But I think those programs need a lot more attention by me and all of us. So I don't really have a satisfactory answer.
And are you aware of any mentoring programs within the state of Washington?
No, but I think they probably, but me saying no doesn't mean they exist. I just don't think I'm very knowledgeable about it. You know, this is also not exactly mentoring, but WSU has some criminal justice faculty who are doing interesting work, I think at Coyote Ridge. I'm definitely speaking on term, but if you kind of look around, and if somebody can hop in, if we have anybody who knows more about criminal justice here, we have some of our faculty are doing really interesting work there collaboratively. I think there's been some like debate team kind of things, but again, I don't want to speak to it because I don't know, but I know that there is good work happening in other parts of WSU.
That seems to be the biggest obstacle. Why are there only 10% of the systems engaging in this great program?
Yeah, I was going to see if Jim unmiked himself. I think the arts and prisons is a tough sell, right? And so if you think about when Arts and Corrections came to be and when it died, it died in 2003. Remember that, right? And so it's hard for a politician to say, hey, you know what, we're going through like a budget crisis. You know what I'm going to be all about? Art in prison, right? And so I think that's why these conversations are really helpful for us to kind of contextualize, oh, wait a minute, like these are parts of a whole, right? Like these are humans that are in communities, and you know, issues of recidivism or intergenerational incarceration, or even, I know when Arts and Corrections was at its height, you know, they were running data and they could show that the program paid for itself by people getting out and staying out, right? And so you can have that logical conversation, but the public isn't always logical, right, about issues of incarceration. So there's limits to how much you can do with a really good Excel spreadsheet, right?
No, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, is there a difference with the for-profit prisons? Are there more opportunities for profit prisons to institute something like this?
That's an amazing question. I have never thought for 1 minute about what's happening program-wise inside for-profit prisons. I should know something about that. Does anybody know anything about that?
My guess would be the very fact that they're a for-profit institution, and Arts and Corrections has always been funded from the state budget. So it's not, the institutions are not paying out of their operational budgets, so to speak, for these programs to be provided. An uneducated guess would be, I would doubt that there's a lot going on in a for-profit prison, but I don't know for sure.
Now, I'll just add, as a parent, first of all, before all of this happened, I will admit I was that person on the other side of the coin that, first of all, didn't know a thing about prison. And if you had asked me to advocate and support extra money spent in prison, that would have been the last thing on my list. I wasn't in those shoes and I had no idea. And it was a very blind way for me to think. Now that I'm in these shoes, I'm on the other side of the fence. I see both sides now. So I understand how it's hard to convince people to dedicate money to inmates when we have other issues that the money, they want to see the money spent on. But seeing this program firsthand and knowing the healing that has happened and the personal growth that has happened for so many people, they have become better human beings, and they have become human beings that will offer a lot if allowed to be on the outside again. So obviously it's a hard thing to convince taxpayers and general public to support, but standing in both shoes now, and see the other side, I get very frustrated when I know what the successes are, and to me, it's money well spent. It's probably one of the most successful things we've done in our California prisons for probably the least amount of money that's spent on everything else. And it's a hard message to get out there. I see the problem with getting it out.
Thanks, Kim. What else do folks want to talk about? Alicia put a link in the chat to the Freedom Project, and that's one. And again, I know there are lots of interesting things going on in the state of Washington. So there's one good start if you're kind of curious to figure out how you could connect with these issues a little closer to home. So thanks, Alicia. What else are folks thinking?
Anna, I'm curious about funding for these projects. You were talking about state budgets. Are they only state budget funded, or are there private funding for this? Where are the funds coming from?
So in the example of Arts and Corrections, it was state funding, and then it routed through. So the William James Association would like manage the granting funds, but the state of California would allocate the grant funds. So it's a yes and. They're state funds that are managed through a granting agency. And then if you're looking to, I think probably Jim will unmute and help me out on this one, but it's a little, I think prison's a tricky place to think about how to use private funds, right? Because that's a real big locked gate, right? And so at some point, I think programs that are sustainable have to really figure out how to engage with the state, right? And figure out how to get that sort of support in a way that might be different than like a community-based program. That's a little bit of, that's my 2 cents on that matter.
I think that's probably basically true. Maybe not accessing the funds, but connecting with the prison to get inside first, because there are a lot of community programs now that are running in California, and a model we're working on right now because of the, I'm going to say, the fickle quality of continued program when you have to keep applying for grant money, is creating avenues where you can process individual community-based funds into a program. So it can be done. We're working on a write-up right now for Mule Creek State Prison that will incorporate community funding into an arts program inside.
And I think
we're doing that, but we're kind of able to do it because some of us have been, involved in the system for 30 some years. So we have kind of an intimate knowledge of how things work. If I was just somebody in the community that went knocking on a prison door, it'd be a lot harder.
And I think that's kind of so I think folks who are most successful are able to figure out where there is an existing route or where there's an existing friendly, right? Like where do you know somebody inside the system, the architecture of the system, that could be a good champion? I know like San Quentin probably is the most famous prison for this, the quality and the quantity of programs that are run. But if you try to call the community resource manager in San Quentin, like plan on never getting a call back, great person, gets 50, I don't know, 500 messages. I mean, there's not a way to really access that person, but there's so much good going on, but you'd have to kind of figure out how could you kind of meet up with something that's already happening, instead of trying to imagine something new and expect to get a call back.
I'm going to put you on Front Street here onto that. I think for people in the Washington area who might be interested in pursuing this, is to connect with you. You may be able to route them to resource people like down in California to just help strategize a little bit, because it's an important, it's hard.
Yeah.
So I'm not putting you on Front Street in terms of being the person, but you could deflect people to me or some of the other people down here to dialogue about developing program.
Yes. So I'm laughing because you definitely did put me on Front Street, but yes, I'm happy to receive any communication, and deflect might not even, that doesn't sound like very nice. I promise I won't deflect you too fast, but yeah, I hope that we know folks who are doing things. I know right now it's really exciting for me because I was able to connect a former graduate student from WSU with a teaching position at a prison in California. And so, yes, absolutely. Those are fun. I mean, that's the fun part of work, right? When we're able to find somebody who's got a passion and we know somebody, and that's the kind of work the Alumni Association does, right? You connect people, you get the pieces going where they need to go. So yeah, we're absolutely all about that.
I wanted to ask about COVID and how that's affected the inmates at all the different prisons, what that's looking like.
That's you, Carol.
That's me. COVID has absolutely slammed everything shut. I was last up at my son's prison on March 8th and 9th for that weekend. And on the 11th, everything shut down. Visiting was closed. That was the first thing they did, was shut down visiting, because they didn't want us coming in there on the weekends because we could bring it in. Well, the bottom line is that staff is coming in and out of there so 24/7, and they didn't have guidelines set up in the very beginning to really get a handle on things right away. COVID got in, and different prisons have been affected in different ways. Some of them, we started off with only 4 positive cases. No, we have a population of 3,200 in our prison, and that's pretty general, and that's pretty average across the state, and there's 34 prisons. You can imagine how many. So little by little, as things blew up, they closed more and more things down. Right now, inmates are no longer allowed to go to the chow hall. They're being fed in their cells, so they come along individually and pass a tray through the cell door. They're not allowed to go to work. They can't go to school. They can't go to programs, and these are self-help programs that they need to continue with AA, NA, all these things, these guys with addiction, and they're not getting programs, and it's hard. One thing they did do with school, though, is the local college put together all of the class syllabus and the books and so forth, and delivered them to the prison. So those guys who are enrolled in college classes are able to do self-study right now and turn their work in and get credit for it. So everyone's grateful for that one. No yard time except for maybe 1 hour every other day. Phones are out on the yard, so the phone calls are every other day. They have to sign up for them, which is a 15-minute call if you get one. It is pretty tight. There's no way to know. And for about 3 weeks, I had no communication with him. And so I got very worried, because that would mean that he's no longer able to, he's probably in quarantine for some reason. Well, it turns out that he had put himself in quarantine because he knew how bad it was out there and didn't want to go out to the telephones because of the situation. So he waited for the numbers to die down. His prison had 11 positive cases for maybe a couple weeks, and then it blew up and it went up to 268 in 2 weeks, in a 2-week period, but that's not the worst. San Quentin blew up to 1,500 cases in 2 weeks because of a transfer. So things happened in different prisons. Right now, Old Folsom is on fire. They've got over 500 positives. It's moving from prison to prison and for different reasons. And they're trying to open visiting again, but they've got this roadmap set up based on the governor's criteria for different counties in the state. And there are different phases, and we have to meet the criteria for each phase in order to move. And one of them is to not have 1 positive case in a 14 rolling day period. Well, day 13, you come up with 1 positive, you go back to square one. So we're not looking to have visiting open for a long, long time. Out of 34 prisons, I think there's only 6 of them, maybe 7, that do not have any positive cases right now. They released over, oh my gosh, I want to say they released, we're now down to 94,000 inmates instead of 134,000 in the state, because they released guys early who had dates that were coming up within the next 6 months, and they thought, just get them out. We don't need to worry about them in here. Get them out. So they did release guys early. So now we're down to 94,000, which made some bed space in some of these prisons. But honestly, until we clearly have a vaccine and everybody has protection to open visiting or let our guards down 1 second, this problem is not going to go away. So I haven't seen him since March, and I don't look for this to end for another year before we're allowed back in. So that's the long story.
That's awful. I'm so sorry. Do you know if they have like good testing in the prisons, or is it kind of just like if you have symptoms then you get tested, or are they doing active testing?
It started out that way where they were, as far as the staff, which obviously that's how it got in. They were telling the staff, hey, they walk in and they give them kind of a cursory verbal thing, like, how do you feel? Do you have a temperature? Do you have a sore throat? No? Okay, we'll have a good day. And then little by little, they started clamping down on that. And now it's mandatory. They do staff testing. I think every 7 days they require that they do testing. And they are now testing them on site. They're not requiring that they go out into the community and get their own test and come back with results, which makes far more sense. They're tracking it better that way. And also the inmates are tested regularly as well. And they've established a quarantine area. They've established an isolation area. Isolation is for true positive cases, and the quarantines are for those that have been exposed or asymptomatic but been exposed. And they little by little they have tightened up their rules and gotten stricter about things, which if it had happened sooner, we may not have seen the outbreaks that we did, but they happened. Mask making in the very beginning, when we all didn't know about wearing masks, inmates felt vulnerable, and they were literally taking their t-shirts and wrapping them around their faces so that they had some protection, because these staff, they could wear a mask if they wanted. So the inmates were getting written up for concealing their identity. This was before masks were mandated. They were getting written up. Then it switched and it flipped, where if they weren't wearing one, they were going to get written up. So now staff and inmates are required to wear masks. In fact, it was my son's his factory that he keeps up and running. They were asked to manufacture thousands of masks for the whole state. And some of the other prisons that have industry too, they were asked to do it. They're cranking out 10,000 masks a day. And they shut down their t-shirt making facility and they turned it into mask making. And they were cranking them out there, and they passed out like 3 or 4 masks to every inmate in every prison in the state. So those were the measures taken, and it's stricter now, but it was kind of like a little bit late, like we should have done this back then. And I think we're catching up.
Anna,
Are you muted?
kind of an answer to the original question is the arts program has gone to a distance learning model where the artist instructors will create packets that can be sent in and done in cell. And those packets then are routed through the administration office back to the artist for review and comment. So there is some program going on, but it's pretty tough. And it's required a lot of work on the part of the artist to develop these packets. But all of them are under contract anyway, so it's a way for them to utilize the available funding and have a program going.
If I could jump in on that one for a second, I think just as folks are trying to imagine facing, future facing how these things could potentially work. One thing that was a happy unintended consequence of developing the curriculum for what we call the family arts program, where we're asking folks to mentor folks outside, is when the teacher builds in the idea that the curriculum doesn't stay with the teacher, right? That there are materials that are handed every time to students, and then they're doing teaching to someone else. It's pretty easy to transition that to a distance learning model. And so again, I'm always thinking about ways, access all day for me. That's like in higher ed, anywhere, any place I find myself. The question for me is always, how can we make this more accessible? Either by making it available to more folks, which of course requires resources and funding and all of that, or just how can we make this accessible differently or more creatively, or and so I think that was a happy consequence of having spent what was a lot of time building those resources for a different purpose, but then they were ready to roll when COVID hit. So 3 minutes. Who has a burning question that you're going to be sad if you don't propose a topic?
So I lived in Louisiana for a while, and Angola prison is their primary prison for some of their toughest cases, I guess I'll refer to them as, because I don't know a better way to describe it. A lot of life prisoners there, but they have, or had probably, because they're probably shut down as well, but they had an annual rodeo a couple of weekends a year. And as part of that, they allowed some of the prisoners who were doing different visual art types of creativity to sell some of their art. So I bought a painting for a friend there, I remember, and I bought, somebody was doing some leather craft stuff, so I got a halter for my horse. But I was just wondering if any of the California system is doing any kind of program where the inmates can sell their work to earn money for, I think they were able to earn money for their personal use spending within the prison system. So I was just curious about whether that's something that's happening in California.
Can I address that? What we had originally in California was what they called the hobbycraft or handicraft program. And every institution actually had a full-time staff member who would administer that program. Inmates were allowed to purchase materials through approved vendors and create craft items or art items. And then those were subsequently sold through a on-site store that had public access. The budget crisis that kind of took away arts and corrections also took away those positions. So we don't have an official avenue for inmates to sell work at this point. I think it's in discussion, but I think it's a long ways off since it's tied to a personnel year, to a staff person. So I think it's a long ways out. We have done things where we've taken artwork out into the community for an exhibition and sale, but the proceeds from those sales are going to a nonprofit or a community-based organization that the inmates choose to support. So that is probably the only way that work is getting out into the community for sale.
So I know we're out of time, but I just want to say my favorite version of that kind of program, there's somebody in Oregon, I thought this was the coolest thing ever. He was former custody staff, which I love, right? Because I think oftentimes we get really overly simplistic versions of, good guys, bad guys, however you want to, wherever you land on the relationship between incarcerated people and custody staff. But this person was former custody staff, like SWAT team level. So he had a lot of respect within the institution, and he designed a program where folks were making, I think, metal stuff and leather, they're doing things. But this to me was what was awesome. The incarcerated people were able to purchase a business license that they then took with them when they got out, right? So not only are you earning, developing a skill, you're earning a modest income, I think modest, right? But to me, the important thing is there's something there that you can that you take with you when you leave. And so again, like thinking as expansively as possible about how we understand, how we see incarcerated people, how we understand them in community, ways that we can think about supporting them that really, I don't know, I'm just not even going to finish the sentence, but that was a really cool model. And I don't know if he's still around. I just met him one time at a conference, but I thought that was pretty neat. Okay, we're out of time, but I just really want to give Carol the last word to put you on the spot. Carol, any final thoughts?
Oh my gosh. Just that, oh boy, this is really my mind's going everywhere, but obviously my thanks to everybody. Any opportunity that I'm given is a gift, and to be able to share such a positive message and help people understand that there is more to think about when we think about inmates, that there are good things out there that are going on. And I just want to thank everybody for their support, and thank you very much for everything. I can't say any more than thank you. That's what it means to me.
Thank you both so much. We appreciate, and Jim and Barbara as well, we appreciate all of you guys coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. But thank you all for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you.